Hi, I'm Bill DeClemente. When I did my documentary, I said that I was going to elaborate more and give more specific details on the Columbia Pictures case, DeClemente versus Columbia Pictures. I neglected to go back and do it then, but I will do it now. In front of me, I have all the documentation, the depositions, all the legal proceedings. There had been some negative talk on the internet that made it look like a frivolous case. Well, it was far from frivolous. Unlike most court systems, in the federal court, you present your case in front of a magistrate. In this case, we did. You don't just walk in and sue anyone. You have to have substance to get it continued. They had very competent attorneys, Columbia Pictures, as you could imagine. They had just been purchased by Sony, which was the biggest conglomerate in the world. They had a network of high-profile attorneys that even represented the NFL. As a small person in the business world, as you and I probably are, we're confronted big time when facing a giant conglomerate, to be overwhelmed by their wealth, ability to buy media, etc. This case, they appealed on a summary judgment, 3 inches thick. It's called the shotgun effect. They throw everything out there, hoping something will stick. We, in turn, at a great cost to me, had competent attorneys that filed the motion, and of course we blew them away. They then filed an appeal of summary judgment. That didn't go too good either. We blew that away. It took 5 years to get them to trial. They fear trials because then they are being confronted and judged by you and I and our peers. That they fear. Now, getting back to the Karate Kid. Back in the 60s, when I originally got it, it started as a nickname, then it became a common law mark when used in commerce, and became eligible to become a patent and registered national trademark with international rights when it was used in interstate commerce. I believe the exact date, which is on the trademark, which you'll see. Trademarks, I owned a few of them. It was back in 1968. In those days, we didn't have computers. I myself had no idea what a trademark even meant. When I learned about it, I found out I could apply for it. I did, and I got it. The Trademark Bureau doesn't care how big you use the name. In those days, we didn't have exposure on the internet and all these things. If we opened up a little store, it was a storefront. We had a sign. Very limited advertising if we could afford, which I really couldn't in my days. At that point, we waited 5 years to file with the Trademark Bureau the application to make it uncontestable. This way they could never even challenge it if they wanted to. It was granted uncontestable status by the Federal Patent and Trademark Bureau. We filed the lawsuit. As I said, 5 years from filing, maybe 5.5, until we actually got them to trial. It takes almost a week just to pick a jury. And they have jury specialists. They try to eliminate women. They try to eliminate blacks because they deal with compassion. They're compassionate people. They fear that. Well, we got in front of the jury that was acceptable to both parties. and we were doing pretty well. Let's put it this way. Friends of mine that were in attendance watching at lunchtime would go and try to sit near the jurors to overhear their conversation. The jurors were actually referring to the attorneys for Columbia Pictures as, quote, the devils. I think I was doing pretty good. 4 days in front of the jury, the judge gives the jury the day off and decides it in favor of the defendants, Columbia Pictures. The next morning when the jury came in and I came in, the jury was stunned. They sat there for 4 days listening to this case to be told it was being decided by the judge. And then, of course, he calls them into a room and debriefs them through hours of bullshit, trying to justify why he decided it and didn't let them decide it. In a criminal case, it has to go to the jury. In a civil case, the judge can decide it. And sometimes in a criminal case, if the judge doesn't like the juror's decision, he can overrule them, reverse it, and decide it. They have a lot of power, maybe a little too much power. Do I think there was anything wrong? You be the judge. I grew up in Queens, New York, Brooklyn, Jersey, up north. I've been around a lot of different people. Never in my life have I heard the name Spat, Judge Spat, S-P-A-T-T. After the trial was over, I did a little research on him. Found that the Judge Spat changed his name, shortened it to Spat from Spatafora. Wow. A fellow Italian like myself stabbed me in the heart. Was he right in his decision? No. One of the things he said is that my trademark did not have secondary meaning. He's wrong. In the second federal circuit in New York, you do not need secondary meaning. Some circuits you do. Okay. His decision is made. That's one of the reasons that he justified in making it. But another thing that transpired, as the media portrayed it, the law journals, which a lot of people aren't aware of. You hear the law journal, you think it's the 10 Commandments. The law journals are written by law students. Many of them go on to prominence in their fields, I'm sure. But they don't sit and listen to the case or even read the case. It's too much. It's files and files, transcriptions and transcriptions. They read the synopsis that the judge presents them with, and then they give their short brief on what he already has shortened as justification for his decision. And a lot of people think judges are smart. Well, some are, but many aren't. Most judges are former attorneys. Well, they're all former attorneys that probably didn't fare too well in their professions, but they had political contacts and wound up getting appointed to a judgeship. We all know by what goes on in the news today, the favoritism that can be done. Do I think the judge got paid off? Nah. Do I think there was political influence? Yeah. We didn't put an amount on the suit. We were going for a percentage that the jury deemed appropriate of the $800 million of gross. That's a big number. We figured, being a win, I'd probably get 10% of 800 million. That's a lot of money. 80 million is a lot of money now, and it certainly was a lot more in the 70s. This was a very unique case. It was, like I said, a little guy like you and I against a giant conglomerate. I made a mistake of not waiting for someone that had been an expert in Indian abstraction, that was an expert on different technicalities, not of law, but in the meaning of the name and how it works. You see, trademarks are unique in that the first user of the name is the owner. Kelly Kay, who was the president of the legal department for Columbia Pictures, after reviewing, prior to the lawsuit, the trademark, etc., sent me a letter, which I have always saved, acknowledging that I was the first. He said, "You proved to us you were the first user of the name." I certainly was. There was a comic book that came out a few years later. That was a copyright, not a trademark. A copyright means you own what you wrote. You own that story. Every time you see a newspaper story, it's copyrighted. They don't own every name in that story. They own the story, per se. I owned the name. I was wronged. Robert Mark Kamen, in his depositions, I have them saved. He was the author of the movie. Came from Queens, New York. Probably with less than a 10-mile circumference of where I trained, where I learned karate. I had even met him. He had even traveled with us on a weekend to Rockaway Playland, which was an amusement park. We invited him to come. He watched me teach a few times. He was a very obnoxious guy. My students didn't even like him. But I said, come on, give him a chance, hang out with us a little bit. Rockaway Playland was an amusement park. In the movie, it was depicted somewhere out in California. Miyagi is a real person. And Eddie McGrath, who was the first instructor to Robert Mark Kamen, he was much more competent than I, older than I, and experienced. In sworn deposition, I have him saved, acknowledged that Eddie McGrath was the inspiration for the tough ex-Marine. So we got Miyagi real, Eddie McGrath real. Me, he denies, because he would have been finished in the entertainment business with the errors and omission policy that the insurance companies have. Case is over. It was a severe hurt to me. But this is what I went through. And this certainly was not a frivolous case, as some of the law students put in their law journals that did go on the internet. DeClemente versus Columbia Pictures. I even met people later on that said, gee, that was a big case. We studied it in college and law school. In Rhode Island, I believe, one person told me he was in Rhode Island in law school when they studied that case. Well, it's history now. Unfortunately, I was not the victor. But I'm here, proud I still own the name. And martial arts has been a great part of my life. Thank you for listening.